Step on a platform, it starts to crack, and a second later it's gone, tumbling into the void below you. There's no physics engine doing this, it's all motion devices. Let me show you how. Hi, Miliastra Mechanics here, or also Damien in the Discord. Miliastra has no real gravity or rigid body physics for objects, so a collapse like you've seen is not simulated, it's scripted. So we will move the object or tile and spin it ourselves, and then we will let the player's eyes fill in the rest. You'll see what I mean shortly. So we'll build one breakaway tile first, top to bottom, and then we'll copy that graph and turn it into a whole prefab group cluster that breaks apart in sync. So you can create your own kind of shatter physics. So before I properly show you how to create the motion device setup, I want to actually explain to you how it works and why it looks like it's tumbling, because I think it helps you for future projects to understand the premise behind it instead of just how to do it. So we're using two options at the same time here to create the tumble effect, and each one does one simple job to give the effect of it tumbling without physics. So one, the linear one, slides middle of the platform straight down, in this case at an angle, and the other one just spins the platform in place around a corner. See? Yeah, it just spins in place. But together, if you watch a corner, as the middle slides down, the corner is also being whipped around by the spin. And so instead of dropping kind of straight down, it swirls. See, the combination really sells the tumble and the fall of the platform. And so those little kind of loops as it spins throughout the air sell the whole illusion. So slide plus spin, and your eyes read it as like tumbling. So nothing's technically actually falling. We're moving it and spinning it. It just really makes it look like it is. So you don't need an actual physics system for it. You just need motion. This might be cleaner to understand. You can see the rotation device spinning the object around its center in the gold color, and the blue line is the linear device moving the center in a straight line. The spiral shape is tracing one corner of the square as it goes down the looping path that the corner takes, which creates the tumbling effect. So linear plus rotation equal tumble. Also, fun fact, a lot of custom physics things you've seen in Miliastra are done using the motion devices similar to this. Okay, I'll explain this part once and refer to it in the future, as it is the same besides one difference. First, let's grab a nice stone platform. We're here in the prefab editor. I know it should be under gameplay mechanism. This will do. Now let's turn its collision off. We will be handling collision ourselves, so we can toggle it on and off at will. Let's add a couple components. We have to go to our components page over here, and let's add a basic motion device. This is what we use to move the platform. Let's add a collision trigger. This sends a signal to the node graph whenever, or to the entity's node graph whenever a player steps into that trigger or an object. But in this case, player, they have an innate collision trigger source. Normally you'd have to put a collision trigger source on something to make it hit a collision trigger. And we also want an SFX player or sound effects player. And we also want extra collision, as we will be handling the custom collision shape ourselves. One thing to note about the basic motion device, we will leave it empty and define the devices in nodes for singular platforms. But for synced multiple tile collapses, we would define the linear and rotation devices in here. Let's quickly define our extra collision. Go to advanced editing, add a new one, and let's move it up and make sure we are in all-in-one mode so we can scale. Move it up. So we basically want it to be equal with the surface and anything we want them to be able to stand on. All right, that should be good. I'm not too concerned about the corners. All right, let's go to these three dashes here, hit copy, and we're going to copy our extra collision into our collision trigger right here. Hit advanced editing, add it, click that, and paste it in. And we're going to move it up just a little bit so that whenever the character steps on it, their foot will go through the box. And over here, we're going to set it to characters only. Finally, let's define a couple variables. Since we will have sound effects, we will create an integer called SFX ID, and I will store our sound effect player ID because we want to stop any sounds playing as the tile goes to collapse downwards. Let's also create two 3D vectors. These will store our initial location and rotation when the entity is created. This way we can reset the platform's position at the end of the collapse event. Name it initial lock and initial rot. And finally, two floating point numbers. Break delay will be how long the platform warns you before it breaks, and respawn delay is the time in which it takes before a platform reappears. So you will edit these and we'll reference them in the script. All right, and now you're done. Let's back out and save this as a falling platform. Hit confirm. And in the nodes, we're gonna make it so when anyone steps in the collision trigger, it'll trigger a bunch of stuff like playing some SFX sounds, like a rumbling, and VFX like burning and smoke, like it's gonna collapse soon. And then we will disable the extra collision so the player drops through it, and we will activate motion devices to make this tumble downwards, among other things. So let's first create our entity graph and name it singular fall. And let's double click and enter it. All right, inside here, let's start by setting the initial location and rotation variables to the entities at the start of the game. So we'll get the when entity is created event, which happens at the start of the game, or whenever it is created. We'll get the entity's location, and we'll feed that to that because that is the platform, and we will set custom variable, and we will set these both to 3D vectors. Hook those together, and also feed the entity pins with this. And now let's name this one initial lock. Make sure you spell that right. Initial rot. And let's feed in the pins. So location pin goes here. Rotation pin goes here. All right, now we want a couple of nodes. Let's get the when entering collision trigger graph. This gets a signal when a player enters the collision trigger on our platform. Let's also get mounting loop special effect. There it is. Mount looping special effect to play the dust when a player steps on the collision box. And sorry, SFX. Let's add a sound effect player. I already found the sound that I want. And let's set the variable of SFX ID to the SFX player's ID here. And make sure to get a self node, a self entity, and let's plug it into these just so we don't forget. We'll fill the rest out in a moment. Let's also grab an activate / disable collision trigger node. Make sure you get the right one because there's a couple. This way it is a one-time signal and can't trigger again if the player like hops around in the box multiple times. The ID should be 1, and let's also make sure we pass the entity on. We'll go ahead and set that to no. We'll fill all this out in a moment. First, let's start a timer, and we will name it break. We'll have to create an assembly list because we have to feed the timer a floating point to set how long to wait till it triggers. We'll feed that into timer sequence. and we're going to pass it our break delay custom variable that you can set in the variable page of the prefab, and just pass it this self. And let's name it, make sure you name it the same thing it is in the variable thing. And now whatever break delay you set will start the timer. Set no loop, and let's also just pass that on and plug that in. And now let's set up the rest of the things. This is the timer that is going to make the platform actually fall. All right, please copy what I filled in here. This is the rumbling sound that happens whenever you step on the platform. And this is the smoking dust that comes out of the platform. These are just ones that I liked, but you're free to move these around how you like. Just make sure you pay attention to things like this to keep track of the player so you can remove the sound later. And also connect these because somehow I didn't. Now let's do the usual when timer is triggered setup, so we know whenever this timer is up. And let's get a branch because we need to do an if check on the name just to make sure it is the right timer, because we were going to have several timers on this. And we'll run timer name into this one, and we'll put whatever we put in our clock up here, which should be break. And let's feed that in. And now whenever this timer goes off, it'll check the name, and if it matches, out of the yes pin is what we'll execute. Okay, first let's close the specified sound effect, so the rumbling stops immediately whenever this timer is triggered. Pass the event source entity, and let's get our SFX ID variable that we set earlier. Pass the same entity into that, SFX ID, and feed that into here. And now whenever the timer goes off, it will end the sound effect that we started up here. All right, and make sure you add a add sound effect player node here. I went ahead and added the entity pin here and filled out the information since I know what sound I want it to make. This is a rock crumbling geo sound, which is a nice sound for a falling platform. And in case you're confused for this, because it is a little confusing to read, attachment point name is GI_root node, capital R, capital N, and G and I are capital. Now let's get a node called clear special effects based on special effect assets right here. And let's get a self entity up here and feed that in here just so we don't have the strands going from over there all the way to here. And make sure to go over here to where our looping special effect is, copy paste that number and put it in here. And now the smoke will clear whenever this happens. Now let's get the activate/disable extra collision node. I want to make sure you get the right one. Feed it in, give it the entity pin and ID 1 and no. This disables the extra collision component we created and makes the player fall through the platform. All right, now let's add the, it's time for the linear motion device. Let's hook that in. And once again, the entity pin. Let's name this linear. And let's set the motion duration to 3. I find this would be good, but you can always change this or set as a variable in the prefab if you want. I like -12 and 0. And this will make it fall straight down. Now the rotation-based motion device. Make sure it's a uniform one. Plug it in, and as usual, give it the entity. And let's name it rotation. Give it a device duration of 3. Now to add some randomness to which way it tumbles or falls, just to make it more fun, we're going to feed a custom vector into the rotation axis orientation. And here we're going to get a get random floating point number node, and we're going to make 3 of them. First, we're going to feed the first one into angular velocity, and we'll set this to the lower limit of 60 and then 140. Feel free to play around with this. This is how fast it falls, or if you want like a more falling dramatic one. We'll feed this into the X and feed this one into the Z. And we'll just put 0 for Y. This is how it tumbles. So we're going to put -1 and 1 and -1 and 1. And this basically means that it's going to get random values. So each time the platform falls, it'll be a little different. It'll tumble a different direction, etc. And this is creating a custom vector, and we're just feeding it numbers and then feeding it into the pin here. All right, now let's get our set up a new timer. Let's just go still this one up here. Select that, hold shift, select, copy, go down here and paste. Let's name this one respawn delay, because this is when the platform will respawn. And let's set this one to respawn as a timer name. Feed it into here. And of course, as always, the entity. And we are done with this section. Okay, let's go copy this when timer is triggered. And this is going to be for the respawn. Let's paste it here. And let's make sure the name is set to respawn in the equals. To save you time, I've already went and placed these. But basically, there are several basic nodes in the way here. So to respawn, we'll want to re-enable the platform's collision. So we re-enable the extra collision. Same for the trigger, because we want to be able to trigger it again. And we will pause the two motion devices, linear and rotation, so they stop falling. So when we respawn them, they aren't tilted or anything. And of course, they are fed into the entity pins here. And finally, to put the platform back where it started, let's get an activate fixed point motion device, which will teleport it basically. And plug that in here. And of course, pass it the entity pin. And let's name this reset movement mode instant, because we want it to teleport the platforms instantaneously. This doesn't matter. For the location and rotation, let's get the custom variable we set up before for the initial location rotation when entity is created. You remember we set those. Copy that and feed it the pins and initial lock and initial rot and center to vectors and feed them in here. Location, rotation, and now it'll go back to where the things start. Let's not lock rotation, fixed time 1, save that. Now let's go back here and add our graph, singular fall, and overwrite and save prefab. And now we should be able to add one to our world. Let's go here and just try it out real fast. We won't be able to see much of the fall because I'm going to show it mostly on the ground so we can jump up to it. And let's change the variables. So let's set break delay to 2 seconds and respawn delay to 3 seconds. And then let's hop into a test play. And if we stand on it, it should start to smoke and then fall. And then it'll come back up in a couple seconds. All right, perfect. The nice thing about what we just did is that it's incredibly modular. If you want your course to be falling barrels, okay, we'll find a barrel. We'll spawn it in, and we will go in and turn off its collision. Go into its components, add a basic motion device, a collision trigger, extra collision, an SFX player. And let's copy the variables from this platform here. In this little menu, hit copy. You can also just write them in manually, like these. And now let's add the collision. We get a cube. Just kind of make it fit generally, fairly. And then, as usual, copy that over to the collision trigger. Paste it, set this just to characters. And set the collision trigger a little bit higher. And maybe rein the sides in so that it only happens when you finally hit the top. And now if we go back and add the node graph and save this barrel, it should theoretically work. All right, let's add it to the scene and give it a, change the variables, give it a break delay of 1, respawn delay of 3, and let's test it. And oh, see, it fell, and that should respawn. And see, it works. It's that easy to create custom falling platforms because of how not modular this is. As long as you have the variables and the basic components, then you should be able to turn anything into a parkour course. Okay, let's say we wanted a whole multiple section collapse of platforms. So say 2x2 or almost a custom Voronoi fracture, if you're familiar. Luckily, we can reuse the entire node graph nearly from the singular platform with just a few changes to the object and the graphs. This time we will use a dummy prefab with a model that hides when it loads into the game. That dummy prefab is going to spawn what is called a prefab group, which is essentially for the singular falling tiles stuck together, except the logic is a little different. I will call the dummy prefab the master platform as it controls everything, and it will have the collision components, etc. on it. And the tiles would just have the motion component for whenever they twist and tumble. Since we are dynamically spawning the prefabs in the world as a group, it helps to have a dummy prefab or master platform to give a visual aid in placing the parkour platforms inside the editor, where obviously the node graph to spawn the prefab groups can't run yet. This may be confusing, but it'll make sense while we do it. Trust. Let's create a normal stone platform and remove its collision and add the components, a basic motion device. So remove collision and add a basic motion device. Fill the basic motion device out like this. One called linear, that is a uniform linear motion device. 3, 0, -12, 4, and this will automatically calculate. And this one called rotation, which is a uniform rotational motion. 3, and since these are hard to see, this is X is 1, Y is 0, and Z is 0.3, and angular velocity is 80. These are basically a hardwired version of our node version. In the prefab group, we will rotate each of the 2x2 platforms 90 degrees, so when they fall, they all splay out in different directions using these devices. Let's say this prefab is the base and call it falling corner. Now copy it 4 times. Make sure this mode is on all-in-one. Alt drag the blue arrow. You want them to just kind of touch together. Alt drag. And then left and shift click each one. Right click, create prefab group, and let's call it falling 2x2. Confirm. And then let's spawn it in right here. You'll see it prefab groups down at the bottom here on the interface. And under prefab group here, let's see each rotate Y to 90 degrees separate. So 0, 90, 180, 270. And this basically just rotates them around. So the axis on which they rotate when they tumble is just different. Oh yeah, make sure to overwrite and save prefab group. All right, now we need to create the dummy prefab. So let's get another one of these. And we want it to match the size of this. Since it's a square, we'll just go 2x, 2z. And let's add everything to this as usual, except the motion device. You should know how to do this already, so I'll come back to you with it done. All right, it's set up. I've copied the variables from the other platform. Has the extra collision and the collision trigger a little bit higher, and I copied that from extra collision, and also an SFX player. So now let's go over here to this tab and go to unit status, create a new status and call it hide model. And we are going to give this an infinite duration and go to effect details, add effect and invisible and object invisible. And hit save in the middle. And now let's go back here. And to this, we will apply it, hit unit status on the component, add status, hide model. Now let's save the prefab and call it master platform. The hide model unit status basically means that while this is visible here, whenever the game starts, and we have this placed somewhere in the scene, it will not be visible. And shortly we'll have the node graph spawn the actual 2x2 down here in this thing's position, which is why we made it the same size. So you can move it around in the editor and have it fit the scene well, since you can't see these in the editor. Now for the node graph work, go to the prefab group down here and take note of your prefab group's index up here. And now let's go to the node graphs. All right, node graph wise, we don't have to change much for the bundled platform. So let's copy singular fall, right click, rename bundled platforms, and let's double click and open it. First, let's erase these two set custom variables. We need to spawn the prefab group where the master platform is. So let's use the create prefab group node, plug it into when entity is created. So whenever the world starts and since this entity is the dummy, we'll give it the dummy's location rotation. So it spawns the prefab group in the actual place. And let's put the prefab group index here. And we want the dummy to own the prefab group and set level to 1 and over at level, no, these don't matter. And we're nearly done. Let's go down to the timer down here and let's delete everything after activate, disable extra collision, except the timer. So let's get the motion devices here and delete that. All right, here are a list of the nodes you'll need. You'll need get self entity, get list of entities owned by the entity, list iteration loop, and 2 activate basic motion devices. Since each tile in the prefab group has its own motion device and is now a child of the dummy platform, we need to get every child of the dummy platform. So use this node, and we need to get the dummy platform. And for every single one of those, we're going to loop through it. And for every child, see loop body, we'll feed the loop body in here, into there. And for every single child of the dummy, we will activate their motion devices as we named it earlier. And the iteration value is the target entity because this iteration value is each child as it loops through it. And then we will, after the loop's complete, we will start the timer to start the respawn delay. And we will plug this into here. So what this is doing is looping through every single child, which is basically every item in the prefab group, and turning their motion devices on, and then starting the timer for the respawning because this will make the tiles collapse. We need to delete everything after the activate/disable collision trigger. We also need to disconnect these because we will use them in a bit. And let's copy the get self entity, get list of all entities, list iteration loop, and move it down here. And let's put the yes branch into that. And what we're going to do here is, since this will be after everything's fallen, we're going to use a remove entity node in the loop body, and we will delete every single child entity of this. And then at the end of this loop, we will respawn the prefab group. All right, once the loop is complete, aka all children are dead, let's re-enable the collisions. And finally, let's feed it back into the same create prefab group from the start. So let's just, you could always move the start down here, but I'll just move this up here. And at the end of the collision reactions, we will create prefab group. And this means that whenever the entity is walked on, it'll do the normal stuff, then it will fall, it'll loop through and make each one fall. It'll start a timer to respawn. That timer will go through and kill all the children entity. And then we will re-enable the collision and respawn the prefab group again. And the loop can continue. Now let's go back to the master platform in the prefab editor. I forgot to disable native collision, so make sure you do that. And then let's add the bundled platform prefab. And let's go back here and place one of the world, which I've already done. And let's load up and test it. And let's test it out. It should collapse pretty fast. And then it should come back. And you can see they respawn at their different times. And obviously you can change the VFX and FSX and everything. And you can also hide the model as before they respawn using the object visible tag. And then disable that unit status. And yeah, that's everything. Very modular. You can add these to almost anything and just add the components and they'll work. And I hope you understand the dummy prefab thing and stuff. If you don't, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. And thank you for watching.